I should have worn the color of the dust, or perhaps the gray of a fading shadow. The thought came to me like a late rain as I smoothed the red silk of my dress for the 10th time, my fingers feeling the heat of the fabric against my skin. The departure from the harbor was meant to be a simple thing, a gathering of the wealthy like birds at harvest time, chirping and preening under the golden strings of the ship's lights. But as the elders say, the sea is calm, but the hearts of men are not. Nothing remains simple when a flame is lit in the dark. 3 years ago, I had turned my back on the expectations of my people, walking away with nothing but a stubborn heart and a quiet mind. I had built a life of small things, a modest room, the steady work of a waitress, and friends who knew nothing of the weight my name might carry elsewhere. I had tasted the air of a free woman, and I had vowed never to look back, yet here I was on the upper deck of this floating palace, the wind playing with my curls while the red of my dress burned like a small fire among the pale, cold gowns of the evening. I stood near the railing, nursing a glass and watching the dark, endless water, trying to be like the fish that moves beneath the surface present, but unseen. The gala ballroom was a forest of crystal lights and laughter that floated through the air like the scent of expensive perfume. It was a place of high walls and deep pockets, a celebration of the illusion that misfortune cannot find those who hide behind gold. I moved quietly among the guests, carrying my tray with the patience of the tide, counting the moments until I could return to the shadows of the staff quarters. That was when the air in the room suddenly thickened, as if a harmattan wind had blown in from the coast. It was not the gentle quiet of a band taking its rest, nor the natural lull of a conversation that had reached its end. This was different. This was the silence that falls upon the forest when a leopard emerges from the tall grass. Every nervous system in the room, mine included, felt the sudden chill of a predator's presence. I did not lift my eyes at once. I had learned long ago that some sights are better left unseen, but the silence pressed against me, heavy and physical, and my hand tightened on the stem of my tray. Somewhere in the grand ballroom, the calm waters of the night were about to break into a storm. The sun dipped below the horizon like a red palm nut dropping into a bowl of indigo dye, leaving the harbor in a bruised twilight. On that departure night, the luxury cruise ship was a giant white beast tethered to the docks, humming with a restless power. Arianna Daniels stood at the railing of the upper deck, her heart seeking the stillness of the deep water even as the world around her erupted in a cacophony of celebration. She had come to this ship not for the music of the cheerful band or the strings of golden lights that hung like glowing fruit from the rigging, but for the anonymity of the sea. To her, the ocean was the ultimate elder. It did not ask for your name or the history of your fathers. She stood in her red silk dress, a garment that felt more like a shield than an adornment, watching the passengers gather like birds at harvest time. They were loud and bright, their laughter clattering like dry bones in a wind. Yet Arianna remained a silent flame amidst their pale shadows. She was unaware of the stir she caused. A woman of calm dignity whose very presence seemed to demand a hush she did not seek. Men looked at her and whispered, their eyes snagging on the curve of her curls as the wind played with them like a gentle hand. In her mind, she was already far away, building a quiet life where the only logos she designed were for the peace of her own soul. She had tasted freedom and, like a traveler who has found a hidden spring, she vowed never to return to the parched lands of her family's business. But even as she looked at the dark water, she was being watched by a hunter who understood the weight of silence. Kang Jae-Min stood in the shadows, his presence a heavy stone in the stream of the crowd. He was a man whose power traveled with the quiet of a leopard, and in Arianna, he saw something rare, a creature that belonged to itself. He watched her with narrowed eyes, feeling a stir of something unfamiliar, a curiosity that was as dangerous as a spark in dry grass. Before he could move, the crowd shifted like waves after a stone is thrown, and the woman in red was swallowed by the sea of faces. He told himself it did not matter, that a man of his standing did not chase shadows. yet the memory of her remained etched in his mind like a proverb carved into wood. The ship finally groaned and began to pull away from the land, leaving the harbor behind as it sailed toward a night that promised both music and the breaking of storms. In the world of men, there are those who roar like the lion to hide their fear, and there are those who travel with the silence of the shifting tide. Kang Jae-Min was a man of the latter sort, a man whose name was spoken in low voices in many cities, not because he was loud, but because his shadow was long and heavy. He had learned early in the harsh winters of his youth that true power does not need to shout. It sits quietly in the corner of a room and waits for the world to come to it. On the luxury cruise ship, amidst the clinking of crystal and the empty laughter of the wealthy, he sat at a private table near the window, his presence a dark anchor in a sea of froth. He held a glass of whiskey in a hand that had signed both fortunes and death warrants with the same steady grace. His eyes, sharp and narrowed like those of a hawk circling a high ridge, did not seek the baubles of the gala night. Instead, they searched for the flame he had seen on the night of departure, the woman in the red dress who had vanished like a dream at daybreak. He remembered her not as a man remembers a passing face, but as a hunter remembers the scent of a rare animal in the deep forest. She had been a creature of the wild, untouched by the artificial lights of the deck, and her disappearance had left a strange, unfamiliar stir in his chest. To Kang Jae-Min, most people were like the birds at harvest time, easily scattered and predictable in their greed. But this woman had moved with a calm dignity that suggested she knew a secret the others had forgotten. He watched the ballroom now, his gaze moving with casual precision, surveying the territory as if it already belonged to him. He did not care for the music or the illusion that nothing bad could ever happen, for he was the man who managed the things that happened in the dark. Then, the air seemed to crystallize, and his glass paused halfway to his lips. He saw her. She was no longer a flame in red, but a shadow in a waiter's uniform, moving quietly among the guests with a tray of drinks. The transformation did not fool him. The way she carried herself, like the sea demanding patience, was a signature no cloth could hide. He watched her the way a predator watches prey, not with hunger, but with the absolute certainty of possession. With a slight, imperceptible movement of his hand, he summoned the ship manager, his voice a low rumble that brooked no argument. "I want that waitress," he said, and in that moment, the calm waters of his world began to churn with the coming of a storm. The red dress, which had burned like a small flame on the night of departure, now lay folded in the darkness of a metal locker, its fire extinguished by the heavy demands of survival. In its place, Arianna Daniels wore the stiff white and black armor of a waiter's uniform, a garment that transformed her from a woman of mystery into a shadow that moved without a name. She stood before the glass, adjusting the collar with fingers that understood the weight of a different kind of silence. To the wealthy who gathered in the grand ballroom, she was now part of the furniture, as invisible as the air they breathed. Yet she carried this new skin with a calm dignity that suggested she was not a servant of men, but a student of patience. The ballroom glowed with crystal lights that hung like frozen rain from the vaulted ceiling, and the laughter of the guests floated through the air like an expensive perfume, masking the scent of the salt spray outside. Arianna moved quietly among them, her eyes lowered, carrying a tray of drinks with the steady grace of a priestess performing a ritual. She knew that work, like the great sea beneath the hull, demanded a heart that did not quail before the storm. She had traded the red of her dress for this uniform of silence, hoping to be swallowed by the sea of faces once more. But fate is a weaver who does not leave loose threads. She felt the shift in the room before she saw the cause, the way the air thickens before the first crack of thunder in the harmattan. As she navigated the private tables near the windows, her gaze inadvertently lifted, and she found herself caught in a trap that had been set weeks ago. There, sitting with a glass of whiskey and the stillness of a mountain, was the man from the departure night. Kang Jae-Min did not smile. He did not need to. he simply watched her with that intense focused attention that made her feel as though the walls of the ballroom had vanished, leaving her alone with a predator in a vast, open field. She did not falter, though her heart tightened like a drum skin in the sun. She continued her work, but the uniform of silence no longer protected her. She was no longer a waitress among many. She was the same woman he had searched for with narrowed eyes. When the ship manager approached her with a face full of sudden, nervous importance, Arianna knew the piece of her quiet journey had ended. The boss had spoken, and from that moment onward, she alone would attend to the man whose power traveled with the quiet of a leopard. The ship manager moved with the frantic energy of a hen whose chick has been spotted by a hawk, his hands fluttering as he directed Arianna toward the private table by the window. The air around the table was different from the rest of the ballroom. It was thick and heavy, like the atmosphere in a clearing where a great leopard has made its bed. Arianna stepped into this circle of silence, her tray balanced with the steady grace of a woman who has carried water from the stream since she was a child. She felt the eyes of the other guests, the birds at harvest, snagging on her, for they understood that a social boundary had been crossed when the boss had made his singular demand. Kang Jae-Min sat as still as a carved idol, his glass of whiskey reflecting the crystal lights like a captured sun. He did not look up immediately, allowing the tension to coil between them like a snake beneath dry leaves. When he finally lifted his eyes, the impact was as physical as a blow to the chest. He did not offer a smile or a nod of greeting. Such things were for men who needed to borrow their importance from others. He simply watched her, his gaze marking her as his own, as if he were reading a book he had waited a lifetime to open. "You will serve only this table tonight," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of an unshakable decree. Arianna bowed her head slightly, her calm dignity remaining uncracked even as her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She moved to pour his drink, her fingers sensing the heat radiating from him, a warmth that was both terrifying and seductive. Around them, the ballroom had shifted its axis. The gentle laughter of the guests had turned into a suffocating silence as they watched the powerful guest fix his entire molecule of attention on a mere waitress. But as the elders say, where one thing stands, another stands beside it, while the boss claimed his prize. Other eyes were watching with a bitterness that burned like dry grass in the harmattan. Tiffany Rhodes stood in the shadows of the service station, her pride wounded by this sudden displacement. The table that was once hers to serve had become a forbidden sanctuary, and in her heart, the seeds of a dark plan began to take root. The calm waters of the gala night were an illusion, for at the boss's table, Arianna had become the center of a storm she did not yet understand. In the shadows of the service station, Tiffany Rhodes stood like a plant whose roots have found only salt and dry earth. Her pride, once as tall and sturdy as an Iroko tree, had been hacked at by the boss's singular command, and the wound was raw. She watched Arianna move with that maddening, quiet dignity, a woman who had not even sought the prize she had now stolen. To Tiffany, the world was a marketplace where one had to shout and scramble to be heard. Yet this black lady with her calm eyes had merely stood still, and the most powerful man in the room had knelt in spirit before her. The bitterness in Tiffany's heart did not merely sit. It burned like dry grass in the heat of the harmattan, crackling and seeking a way to consume everything in its path. She remembered the table near the window as her own territory, a place where she had expected to earn the favor of the wealthy. Now, she was relegated to the periphery, a forgotten bird, while Arianna alone attended to the leopard. She saw the way Kang Jae-Min looked at the waitress, not as a master looks at a servant, but as a man looks at his destiny. A man who brings home ant-infested faggots should not complain if he is visited by lizards, she whispered to herself, a dark proverb for a dark night. If Arianna wished to be the center of the boss's world, then she would also be the center of his wrath. The opportunity arrived when Kang Jae-Min briefly rose from his seat, leaving the private table to consult with a business associate by the harbor view windows. The ballroom was a sea of movement, a chaotic dance of silk and laughter that provided the perfect cover. With the quick, silent fingers of a thief at a crowded festival, Tiffany slipped toward the table. No one noticed the snake slipping through tall grass as she reached for the expensive leather wallet resting near the half-empty whiskey glass. It was a heavy thing, weighted with the secrets and the power of the man who owned it. Tiffany did not linger. She retreated into the dim light of the staff corridor, her heart thumping like a drum in the distance. She reached the staff lockers, her eyes darting like a bird's, and with a final, trembling movement, she tucked the stolen prize deep inside Arianna's locker. The trap was planted beneath the dry leaves, and Tiffany walked away with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Waiting for the scream that would shatter the night, the shadows of the staff corridor were long and silent, like the breath of an ancestor watching a transformation he did not approve of. Tiffany Rhodes moved through this dimness with the hurried step of a thief who hears the village drums in the distance. Her fingers clutched the expensive leather wallet, a heavy thing that felt like a hot coal against her palm. She had taken it from the boss's table when the world was looking at the harbor, and now she sought to bury the evidence where it would do the most damage. She reached the row of metal lockers, her eyes darting like a bird that senses a hawk in the sky. The air here smelled of old soap and the weary sweat of those who serve, a sharp contrast to the perfume and whiskey of the ballroom above. With a hand that shook like a leaf in the harmattan, she found the locker belonging to the Black Lady. The lock was a simple thing, no match for a woman whose envy had sharpened her mind into a blade. Quietly, like a snake slipping through tall grass to reach a nest of eggs, Tiffany slid the wallet deep into the darkness of Arianna's locker. She pushed it behind a spare apron and a small book of poetry, tucking the trap beneath dry leaves so that it would not be seen until the moment of the great shaming. As she pulled her hand away, she felt a surge of bitter triumph. The woman who had stolen the boss's gaze would now be branded a common thief in his eyes. Tiffany shut the door with a sharp metallic click, a sound that seemed to echo through the empty corridor like a final judgment. But as the elders say, fate often laughs at the plans of the wicked. She turned to flee back to the lights of the gala, her face a mask of feigned innocence, unaware that the very silence she relied upon was about to speak against her. She left the room in a hurry, her heart hammering a rhythm of fear and malice, while behind her, the calm waters of the night prepared to break into a storm that would consume the guilty and the innocent alike. When Arianna Daniels entered the staff quarters, the air was thick with the scent of unwashed worry and the cold metallic tang of the lockers. She saw Tiffany Rhodes leaving in a great hurry, her shadow fleeing before her like a guilty thing. The woman shut her locker with a sound that was too loud for a quiet heart, as if she feared the very hinges might cry out her secret. Arianna stood still for a moment, her brow furrowed. She had lived long enough in the house of her father to know that when a hen begins to cackle without cause, a snake is usually nearby. With the calm dignity that was her only shield, she opened the door to her own locker. Her heart, which had survived the storms of her past, suddenly tightened like a drum skin in the midday sun. There, resting atop her spare apron, was an unfamiliar leather wallet, its expensive skin glistening in the dim light like the eyes of a trap. She did not scream, nor did she let her hands tremble. She understood immediately that trouble had been planted like a trap beneath dry leaves. Arianna knew that in the world of the powerful, a small lie can grow into a great fire that consumes the innocent. To be found with the boss's property would be to lose the freedom she had built with such stubborn heart. But as the elders say, the bird that flies off the earth and lands on an ant hill is still on the ground. Tiffany had thought her clever, but she had forgotten that a woman who has walked away from a mafia throne knows the scent of a predator's trick. Without panic, Arianna reached out and took the wallet. It was heavy with the weight of Kang Jae-Min's authority, a thing that could break a person as easily as a dry twig. She did not linger in her own space. With the silent grace of the tide, she moved to Tiffany's locker, which had not been fully latched in the other woman's haste. She gently slipped the wallet inside, burying it beneath a pile of stained napkins. She closed the door with a soft click and walked back toward the ballroom. She had returned the snake to its own nest. Behind her, the corridor remained silent, but Arianna could feel the shift in the night. The trap was no longer hers to fear, and as she straightened her uniform, she prepared to watch the storm break upon the one who had conjured it. The quiet of the staff corridor was not the peace of a resting forest, but the heavy, suffocating stillness that comes before the earth is torn asunder by lightning. Into this silence, a scream erupted, sharp and jagged like a broken clay pot. It was Tiffany Rhodes, her voice cutting through the dim light to announce the arrival of a storm she thought she had mastered. "My God!" she shouted, her words thundering through the hallway like a warning drum in a besieged village. "Someone has stolen the boss's wallet. It is gone from his table." The sound brought the world crashing in. Footsteps thundered against the floorboards as staff members rushed toward the noise, their faces tight with the fear of men who know that when a leopard loses its kill, the whole forest pays the price. Tiffany stood before the lockers, her finger trembling as she pointed toward the row of metal cages. Her eyes wide with a performative terror that burned like dry grass in the harmattan. The ship manager arrived, breathless and ashen, his authority crumbling like sun-dried mud under the weight of the news. Behind him, the shadows of the corridor seemed to lengthen, watching the dance of the wicked with the cold indifference of the ancestors. Tiffany's gaze darted toward Arianna's locker, her heart beating a rhythm of expectant malice. Waiting for the moment the Black Lady would be cast into the fire, Arianna Daniels stood at the edge of the gathering, her calm dignity a garment that no accusation could stain. She watched the frantic movement with eyes that had seen the old sins of powerful men and knew that a trap, once moved, becomes the hunter's own cage. She did not speak. She did not need to, for she knew that fate often laughs at the plans of the wicked. Far away in the grand ballroom, where the crystal lights glowed with the illusion that nothing bad could ever happen, Kang Jae-Min slowly raised his head. He did not need to hear the scream to know that the night had changed. He sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the way the calm waters were churning into a whirlpool. His jaw tensed to granite, and the predator within him stirred, ready to find the hand that had dared to disturb his peace. The storm had broken, and as the crowd in the corridor swelled, the weight of the stolen prize prepared to fall upon the shoulders that truly bore the guilt, the ship manager, a man whose courage was as shallow as a seasonal stream, led the way to the staff quarters with footsteps that stumbled over his own shadows. Behind him followed Kang Jae-Min, a presence as cold and heavy as a mountain stone. The boss did not speak, but the air around him crackled like the atmosphere before a great lightning strike. He was a leopard whose peace had been disturbed, and the forest held its breath. In the staff corridor, the air was thick with the scent of fear and the sharp, metallic tang of the lockers. Tiffany Rhodes stood amidst the huddle of workers, her face a mask of trembling outrage that hid the dry grass of her envy. When Jae-Min entered, the frantic chatter died instantly, replaced by the suffocating silence of a predator surveying territory that already belonged to him. He did not look at the staff. His eyes, dark as a midnight sea, were fixed on the row of metal cages where secrets were buried. "Open them," the manager commanded, his voice thin and brittle like a dry twig. One by one, the lockers were thrown open, their contents spilled out like the entrails of a sacrifice. Tiffany watched with a heart that hammered against her ribs, her gaze darting toward Arianna's locker, waiting for the moment the trap beneath the dry leaves would be sprung. She expected the scream of discovery to be her triumph. Yet she forgot that fate often laughs at the plans of the wicked. When Arianna's locker was opened, it revealed only the spare apron and the small book of poetry, pristine and empty of guilt. A murmur of confusion rippled through the gathered crowd. Tiffany's face paled, the color draining from it like water from a cracked pot. Before she could find her breath, the manager turned to the next locker in the row, Tiffany's own. The door swung wide with a sharp, metallic cry. There, nestled amidst Tiffany's stained napkins, lay the heavy leather wallet, its expensive skin glistening like a brand of shame. The silence that followed was not the quiet of peace, but the silence of a predator who has finally found the scent of the snake. Kang Jae-Min slowly raised his head, his intense focused attention settling on Tiffany with the weight of a final judgment. He did not need to ask how the wallet had traveled. The terror in the woman's eyes told a story as old as the hills. The storm had broken, and it had found the roof that was truly rotting. The metallic ring of the locker door echoed like a funeral bell in the sudden hush of the staff quarters. All eyes were fixed on the heavy leather wallet resting in Tiffany's nest, its expensive skin an undeniable brand of guilt against the backdrop of stained napkins. Tiffany Rhodes stood frozen, her mouth open but empty of words, like a person who has set a bushfire only for the wind to change and drive the flames back upon her own hut. The ship manager's face transformed from the ashen hue of fear to the dark purple of a man who has been made a fool. He looked at the stolen prize, then at Tiffany, his voice no longer a dry twig but a whip of indignation. A snake that bites its own tail finds no sympathy from the village, he hissed, his authority returning now that a culprit was found. Kang Jae-Min did not move. He remained a dark, immovable stone in the center of the frantic room, his intense focused attention shifting from the locker to the trembling woman who had tried to play a god's game. He did not need to shout. The silence of a predator that radiated from him was enough to make Tiffany's knees buckle until she sank to the cold floor, her performative outrage dissolving into a puddle of genuine terror. At the edge of this storm stood Arianna Daniels. She did not gloat, nor did she allow a flicker of triumph to disturb the calm dignity of her features. She stood with her hands clasped before her, a woman who understood that fate often laughs at the plans of the wicked and that the truth, like the sea, always finds its level. The other staff members, who had rushed in with footsteps thundering to witness a shaming, now looked at Arianna with a new kind of reverence. They saw a woman who had been marked by the most dangerous man in the room and had emerged from the fire without the smell of smoke upon her. With a slight, imperceptible nod, Kang Jae-Min signaled that the matter was ended. He turned his back on the weeping Tiffany as if she had already ceased to exist, his gaze sliding back to Arianna for just a moment before he walked toward the door. In that moment, the room went silent again, but the air had changed. It was no longer the silence of a trap, but the silence of a transition. Arianna picked up her tray, her heart steady, and followed the boss back toward the crystal lights of the ballroom, knowing that while she had won the room, the real storm was only beginning. The crystal lights of the ballroom seemed to burn with a newfound intensity as Arianna returned to her station. The air around her no longer thick with the scent of a trap but charged with a heavy, unspoken promise. Kang Jae-Min sat at his table once more, his glass of whiskey untouched, his gaze fixed upon the harbor view windows as if reading the movement of the stars. When Arianna approached to refill his water, the room went silent in a way that was different from before. It was the gentle settling of quiet that occurs when a community recognizes that a new power has been established in its midst. He did not wait for her to finish her task. With a movement as slow and deliberate as the growth of an ancient tree, he reached out and caught her wrist. His fingers were warm and steady, a physical touch that sent a jolt through Arianna, making her feel as though she were the only thing in the room that existed. He did not look up at the other guests, those birds at harvest who watched from a careful distance. "The snake has been cast out," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of a final decree. "But a woman who can walk through a fire without the smell of smoke upon her is not meant to carry trays for the amusement of fools." Arianna stood still, her calm dignity masking the tremor that moved through her heart. She looked down at the man who controlled everything and saw not a master, but a soul that was wounded and searching for something real amidst the illusions of wealth. "I am a waitress," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship. "I seek only a quiet life and the freedom of the sea." Jae-Min let go of her wrist, but his intense focused attention remained locked onto her eyes like a branding iron. "There is no freedom for the rare animal in a forest full of hunters," he replied, his gaze marking her in a way she knew she would never survive. "You are under my protection now, not because you are a servant, but because I have never wanted something this badly before, and I do not intend to let the sea take you back." The message was clear to everyone in the grand ballroom. She was no longer a novelty or a message to be used by others, but a possession of the dawn. As Arianna stood there, suspended between the life she had built and the storm he offered, she realized that the calm waters of her journey had truly vanished. He had offered her a choice that was not really an invitation, and as she looked into his dark eyes, she felt the walls she had built around herself finally begin to crack. The peace that followed the exposure of the snake was as deceptive as the moonlight that dances on the surface of a deep well. While Arianna moved under the umbrella of the boss's protection, far above the salt spray of the deck, other minds were at work, weaving a net of iron and malice. For as the elders say, when a great tree falls, the smaller birds do not only mourn, they look to see where the sunlight will now lend double quotes. In the darkened rooms of a rival syndicate, the scandal of the stolen wallet was not seen as a petty grievance of waitresses, but as a crack in the armor of Kang Jae-Min. They saw how the dawn had allowed his intense focused attention to settle upon a single woman, and they understood that a leopard who looks only at one star forgets to watch the shadows behind him. To them, Arianna was no longer a person, but a weakness they had found, a tether they could pull to bring the mountain down. The message arrived not with a scream, but with the cold efficiency of a predator that has already tasted blood. Rumors began to circulate through the ship's communication lines like a slow poison, suggesting that the scandal in the staff quarters was a sign that Jae-Min's organization was losing its grip, that his judgment had been clouded by the black lady who stood beside him. They sought to use the very protection he offered her as a liability he could not afford, a way to isolate him from his own men who watched with careful distance. Jae-Min sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the way the calm waters were being stirred by a wind from a distant, colder shore. He stood on the terrace of his private suite, his jaw tense to granite, watching the city lights on the horizon as if they were the eyes of 1,000 enemies. He knew that the truce was broken and that his love for Arianna had become a target in a game that did not follow the rules of the sea. The rival syndicate had struck from above, turning his moment of triumph into a trap wrapped in the same words of loyalty and power. As the cruise ship plowed through the night, Arianna realized that the old sins of the mafia world were reaching out to reclaim the peace she had so briefly held, and that the storm was no longer just a threat, it was at the door. The luxury cruise ship, once a vessel of light and laughter, had become a floating labyrinth where every shadow hid a jagged truth. The air in the private suite was no longer filled with the scent of champagne and gold, but with the metallic tang of an approaching storm. Kang Jae-Min stood by the window, his silhouette a dark pillar against the flickering lights of the distant coast. The rival syndicate had moved with the silent efficiency of a hunter, and the truce was broken before the first word of war was even whispered. "They have blocked the main exits to the upper deck," Jae-Min said, his voice a low rumble that carried no fear, only the cold precision of a man surveying a battlefield. He looked at Arianna, and for a moment, the predator within him was replaced by a wounded man who realized his love had become a liability he could not afford. But Arianna Daniels was no longer the fragile thing who sought only to remain invisible. She stood with her feet planted firmly on the shifting floor, her calm dignity transformed into the steady resolve of a woman who understands that work, like the sea, demanded patience. She knew the architecture of this ship, not as a guest, but as one who had navigated its service tunnels and back exits in the uniform of silence. "The service lift behind the galley leads to the engine room," she said, her voice steady like a drum in the distance. "From there, a maintenance ladder rises to the lifeboats. It is a path they do not know, for they only look at the doors that scream of power." Jae-Min studied her, a flicker of surprise and relief crossing his features. He realized that she was not a novelty to be protected, but a bridge between the world of light and the world of shadows. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady, tracing the lines of her palm as if reading a new proverb written in flesh. "You are asking to walk into the fire with me," he whispered, his intense focused attention locking onto her eyes. "I am already in the fire," she replied, her voice a soft but unbreakable vow. "I am your wife. Where you are, I am." Together, they moved into the darkened corridors, Arianna leading the most dangerous man in the city through the gaps between the respectable world and the one that operated in shadows. She was the navigator in this complicated world, turning his weakness into something less exploitable. As they descended into the belly of the ship, the calm waters were left far behind, and the storm they entered was one they would face as equals, bound by a love that had finally found its courage. The sun rose over the harbor like a giant golden coin emerging from a wash of gray water, signaling that the long night of the sea had finally reached its end. The luxury cruise ship, once a theater of old money and old sins, now pulled toward the docks with the heavy, weary groan of a beast returning to its lair. On the upper deck, Arianna Daniels stood beside Kang Jae-Min, the wind no longer a playful hand in her curls but a witness to the transformation that had taken place in the belly of the ship. The calm waters they had left behind weeks ago were gone, replaced by a world that was beautiful and corrupt, dangerous and alive. As the gangway was lowered, the birds at harvest began to scatter, their laughter muted by the sight of the boss and the woman who walked beside him. Jae-Min did not look at the crowd. His intense focused attention was fixed on the horizon, yet his hand remained firmly clasped in Arianna's. He was a man who controlled everything, yet in the quiet moments before the ship touched the land, he had shown her a raw love that was capable of surrender. "The harbor is reached," Jae-Min said, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of the legacy they would now build together. "You can walk away now, Arianna. The sea has brought you back to the world of quiet things." Arianna looked at the city, where the old power waited in the marble halls, and then she looked at the man who had branded her with his gaze. She understood that choosing him was a choice that had no real safety, a path that would be filled with consequences and dangers she could not yet name. But she also knew that she was no longer the fragile thing who sought to be invisible. She had found a place to belong, suspended between worlds, in a life that was real and worth fighting for. "I have already surrendered," she whispered, her calm dignity unshaken by the storm they had survived. "I do not seek the freedom of the shadow anymore. I choose the fire." Jae-Min nodded, a flicker of surrender in his own dark eyes, and together they stepped off the ship and onto the solid earth. Behind them, the great vessel sat silent in the morning light, but before them, a new story was beginning, one with roots deep enough to endure even when the ground beneath them shifted. It was not a normal life, but it was theirs, and as they walked into the heart of the city, the world went silent once more, recognizing that the most dangerous man in the forest had finally found his equal.